Today I messed up by being absolutely ruined by a freak accident involving my ball sack being punctured. I did not have a good time. Hey everyone, I'm still in shock from yesterday's events, but I'm finally home and ready to share the ridiculousness of it all. So, there I was, being a good grandson and ordering a bunch of kitchen appliances for my grandparents' Christmas gifts. They had just renovated their kitchen, and I wanted to surprise them with some matching items. Everything was going smoothly until I felt a little pinch in my, family jewels. I brushed it off, thinking it was just my pants acting up again. You know how it is. Sometimes the fabric folds over, and those little plastic ends of the drawstring can dig in a bit. Fast forward about 20 minutes, and I walked into the kitchen to tell a family member about my Amazon haul. That's when I noticed my pants felt oddly damp. Confused, I went upstairs to investigate. And to my horror, I discovered that my lower body was drenched in blood. Like a lot of blood. Panic set in as I ran around the house, pantless, screaming to my mother that I was dying. I tried to calm myself down, thinking it was just a little cut that would stop bleeding soon. Spoiler alert, it did not. This tiny wound, smaller than a pencil eraser, was relentless. An hour later, I found myself frantically calling the doctors, but they were no help. So, off I went to the emergency room, applying pressure to my injury and feeling like I was on the verge of bleeding out for no good reason. As I approached the emergency room, which was packed with flu patients and had a waiting time of up to 40 hours, I stuffed a handful of tissues against my injury and braced myself for what lay ahead. I walked in past a sea of people who looked like they were on the brink of collapse and approached the reception desk. They took my name and told me to have a seat, except there were no seats left. So I stood awkwardly by the Christmas tree for 2 hours, trying to ignore the fact that blood was dripping from my pants onto the floor. Finally, I decided enough was enough. I'm usually a quiet person, but I had to speak up. I told the staff, if you don't get me seen too soon, you better grab a mop. I explained that I was genuinely bleeding and starting to fear for my life. Suddenly, I was rushed in to see a team of medical professionals, 2 young women, 3 other women, and 1 older guy. They all stared at me, waiting for my explanation. The guy, looking a bit skeptical, told me to strip down. So there I was, a 6'3", slightly overweight, bearded guy, standing in front of a group of women and 1 guy who looked like he was judging me. What followed was a scene I'll never forget. More blood than I thought was possible. I was not okay. I noticed my manhood had shrunk to a fraction of its usual size, and I could see the concern in the nurse's eyes. After what felt like an eternity, they decided I needed to skip the waiting room and go to the treatment center. But instead, I was left sitting there for another 7 hours while people with minor injuries were called in before me. Just when I was about to lose all hope, around 3 a.m., a doctor who had just moved to the UK from Nigeria came in and called me back. He checked me over and said, "Wow, this should have been dealt with hours ago. You need stitches." I felt like I had found an angel in scrubs. He stitched me up while reassuring me that everything would be okay. Now I'm sitting here in fear of moving, hoping those 3 stitches hold. I'll definitely be trying to forget this day ever happened. Thanks for reading. Am I the bad guy for divorcing my husband over a racist joke his best friend's wife made? I'm a 27-year-old woman of Chinese-Japanese descent, and my husband is a 27-year-old white man. We've been married for 2 years, but we've known each other for about a decade, since our university days. It was important to him that I get along with his friends, who are also mostly white and in their 30s. I really made an effort to connect with them, playing games online together for months and meeting up a few times. A few months ago, we visited one of his friends' houses. As we arrived, his friend's wife came down to greet us. She immediately made a comment that left me speechless. She said something along the lines of, "My cats were going crazy today and speaking Chinese," followed by some noises that were meant to mimic the language. I just stared at her blankly. The room was filled with white faces, and no one laughed. It was shocking. Normally, I would have spoken up right away, but the moment felt so out of place, especially with everyone arriving for the party. To my dismay, she repeated the joke again, saying her cats were crazy and making the same noises. At that point, I felt completely dehumanized. Comparing my language to the sounds of cats howling was not only inappropriate, but also deeply offensive. I told my husband that if he didn't say something to her after the party, I would. He assured me he would, and I believed him at that moment. I also made it clear that I had no interest in hanging out with them again. Casual racism like that is alarming, and I felt it was unacceptable. 3 months passed and my husband hadn't said a word to her. The only reason he finally brought it up was when I discovered he had been playing a popular online game with her and his friend every week. I asked him if she had apologized for the joke, and he became uncomfortable. It turned out he had never confronted her about it, despite his promise. I was shocked and hurt. It felt like he was prioritizing his gaming sessions over standing up for me. That night, we had a huge fight. I expressed my frustration over his tendency to please others at my expense. I left the house, and he went to vent to his friend. Finally, he talked to them about the joke. But by then, I had lost a significant amount of trust in him. In a later argument, he blurted out, "What do you want me to do? Cut out my friends and family?" I had never asked him to do that. He has low contact with his family because of their explicit racism, and I had always respected that boundary. What struck me was his suggestion that cutting ties with racist people was unreasonable. I felt relieved when he said that, as it made me realize how serious this issue was. I asked him why he would rather play games with someone who made a racist joke than stand up for me, and he replied that he didn't believe she was racist. He thought she made a mistake. But how could someone make that same mistake twice without it being intentional? Ultimately, I decided to divorce him. He couldn't understand why I would end our marriage over a joke made by someone else. He insisted that he couldn't control his friends or their wives, claiming he knew she could do better. To me, this wasn't just about the joke. It was about the lack of support I felt from him. Some people suggested that I should have confronted her myself, but I trusted my husband to handle it. He told me he would, and I had no reason to believe otherwise. There were definitely other issues in our marriage, but this was the final straw. I felt like he consistently prioritized others over me, and this incident was just another example of that pattern. Looking back, I remember a time when divorce was also on the table due to a disagreement about getting a dog. He became frustrated with the dog, and I told him I would take the dog and leave. To his credit, he sought therapy and medication for his anxiety after that incident. But it was just one of many strains in our relationship. I never wanted him to cut out his entire friend group. I just needed him to stand up for me when it mattered. The fact that he chose to play games with a person who made a racist comment instead of addressing it left me feeling unheard and unvalued. As I reflect on this experience, I realize that it was about more than just a joke. It was about trust, support, and the priorities we hold in our relationships. I've been considering marriage counseling, but for now, I need to take a step back and reevaluate what I truly want moving forward. Thank you for listening to my story. It's been a tough journey, but I'm grateful to feel heard. I never thought I would find myself in a situation like this, but here I am, reflecting on the choices I've made and the relationship I've built with my husband. It all started with a joke, a racist joke made by my husband's best friend's wife. At first, I brushed it off, thinking it was just a thoughtless comment. But as time went on, I realized it was much more than that. You see, my husband and I have always had our differences, especially when it comes to religion and politics. I've never believed him to be a racist, but he has a tendency to enable those who are. He often makes excuses for their behavior. And I found myself in uncomfortable situations where I had to interact with people who hold prejudiced views. It's a conflict that has simmered beneath the surface of our relationship for years. When the incident with his friend's wife occurred, I expected my husband to take a stand. He assured me he would talk to her about it, but instead, he chose to play video games with her for the next 3 months. I felt betrayed. How could he justify her comment as a mistake? I thought that a simple apology would suffice, allowing us to chalk it up to a one-time lapse in judgment. But that apology never came. As the weeks turned into months, I began to question everything. If he could lie about something so seemingly benign, what else was he capable of hiding from me? The lack of communication and his unwillingness to confront the issue left me feeling isolated and frustrated. I felt like I was fighting a battle alone, and it was exhausting. After posting my story online, I was surprised by the overwhelming response. I had never shared anything like this before, and the comments flooded in. So supportive, while others were downright hostile. It was eye-opening to see how many people were willing to defend the friend's wife, dismissing the seriousness of her comment. I realized that I wasn't alone in my feelings, and that gave me some comfort. In the midst of all this, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I reached out to my husband's friend and his wife directly. I knew they were active on the same platform where I had shared my story, and I wanted to hear from her personally. To my surprise, she apologized. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. However, the whole situation left me feeling ridiculous. If my husband had just been honest with me from the beginning, we could have avoided this entire mess. Instead, he chose to lie and keep the peace, which only deepened my sense of betrayal. I began to wonder if I could ever trust him again. As I reflect on everything that has happened, I find myself at a crossroads. I still love my husband, but I can't ignore the fact that he chose to prioritize comfort over honesty. It's a tough pill to swallow, and I'm left questioning what the future holds for us. I'm not sure if we can rebuild the trust that has been shattered, but I know I need to prioritize my own well-being. In the end, I'm left with more questions than answers. Can a relationship survive when one partner is willing to lie to maintain peace? I guess only time will tell. Thank you to everyone who took the time to read my story and offer their support. It means more than you know. Am I the bad guy for not wanting to give my SIL more money even if it means she goes to prison for years? I found myself in a tough situation recently, and I'm still grappling with whether I made the right choice. My husband and I were sound asleep one night when he received a late-night text from his half-sister, who is in her 50s. She was asking for a loan of $1,000 to pay a fine due the next day. Naturally, my husband was concerned and called her to confirm it was really her. She assured him it was, but when he pressed for details, she mentioned that the FBI was involved and that she needed the money to pay an attorney to clear her name. Despite my reservations, my husband decided to send her the money. He felt she had never asked us for anything before and had always been honest with him. I, on the other hand, was uneasy about the whole situation. We were already living on a tight budget, as I'm a stay-at-home mom to our 1-year-old daughter, and my husband's job had been slow lately. We barely managed to scrape together the first $1,000, and I knew that sending more would cut into our essential expenses like groceries and diapers. Later that day, my husband received another text from her, panicking because an additional $300 late fee had been added, which she also couldn't pay. We suggested she reach out to one of their other brothers who is financially stable, but she insisted that my husband was the only one she could trust with this situation. I couldn't help but think that if I were facing potential jail time, I would be reaching out to everyone I could for help, not just one person. My husband started to question whether he had done the right thing by sending her the first $1,000 and whether he should send more. I was furious that he had sent any money without my explicit agreement. I didn't believe her story and wondered if this was some sort of test or a sign of a mental breakdown. The whole thing felt off, especially since I couldn't find any public record of her situation involving the FBI. To add to the complexity, my relationship with her has been rocky. She recently separated from her husband, and while I don't know the details, I've always felt that she has a tendency to play the victim. She often shares her dramatic life stories with my husband, which leads him to put off her calls for months. She refuses to seek therapy despite her claims of trauma, and when I first started dating my husband, she made it clear that no one would ever be good enough for him in her eyes. We've only met in person a couple of times, and while she was cold to me initially, she later apologized, claiming I wasn't as bad as she had thought. Still, I can't shake the feeling that she has a lot of unresolved issues, and I'm not sure I want to be involved in her drama, especially when I have my own family to care for. In the end, I stood firm against sending her more money. My husband loves his sister and thinks I'm being unreasonable for being skeptical. I'm left wondering if I'm the bad guy for prioritizing our family's needs over her crisis. I just want to do what's best for my family, but I can't help but feel conflicted about the whole situation. My mom made my child sick, and my dad demanded my silence. Recently, my parents returned from a trip to Egypt, and the very next day, my mother was eager to see my 8-week-old son. Before their trip, I had already discussed with my partner how uncomfortable I felt about her holding the baby, especially considering the hygiene concerns associated with Egypt. I mean, the water there is not safe to drink. As I turned my back for just a moment, my partner nudged me, and I quickly went over to check on my son, who had started to cry. My mother, having washed her hands as I had requested since my son was born, leaned over to play with his feet. I tried to stay calm, but my heart sank when she casually mentioned that she and my father had gotten diarrhea during their trip due to the water. I couldn't help but feel alarmed. After I finished feeding my son, she asked to hold him, and I firmly said no. Her reaction was one of surprise and defensiveness, insisting that she was fine. I explained that I was just not comfortable with it, but if she was still feeling well by Sunday, she could hold him during our family lunch. She then launched into a lecture about how I couldn't protect him forever and that getting sick was part of growing up. I was used to hearing this from family members, so I just nodded along, trying to keep the peace. The next day, my worst fears came true. My baby came down with diarrhea, and I spent the night up with him, dealing with gas and dirty diapers. Feeling frustrated and upset, I texted my mother to express my disappointment. I told her it felt like her desire to see my son overshadowed his need for protection. I hoped that by sharing my feelings, we could move forward positively. The following morning, my father texted me, having deleted my message from my mother's phone. He told me to think before I wrote. Little did he know, I had spent a considerable amount of time drafting that message to be both firm and polite. I was furious and decided to call them both, but they didn't answer. I insisted that we could either have a civil conversation or I would resend my message. My father then claimed it had been a week since my mother had been ill, which was not true, and demanded that I show some respect. I responded that respect doesn't mean silence. I explained that he couldn't mediate a conversation by excluding my voice and that he was undermining my role as a parent. He didn't reply. Now, my son is still uncomfortable, but his diarrhea has almost stopped. I can't shake the feeling that I let him down by not protecting him when I could have. With Christmas approaching, I worry about maintaining good relations with my family, but I also feel it's not my responsibility to fix this situation anymore. I'm left wondering, am I in the wrong for getting angry and blaming my mother? It seems unlikely he caught this from anyone else since we hadn't seen anyone else that week. What do you think? Am I the bad guy here?